We are glad you're here. We're in the book of Ecclesiastes. We're in the 7th chapter. So if you want to be turning there, you can. If you don't want to turn there, you don't have to. You do have the notes there in front of you. One thing you may have already picked up on is that when I prepare the notes, I've got today from verse 10 to verse 13, I've prepared those notes and I've handed them to you. Well, we may not get to verse 13. We may get to verse 12. But next week I'll have to start on verse 13. So I'll hand out verse 13 to you. So that means now you got what? 2 13s, don't you? Well, you don't need 2 13s if you're keeping them all. You can throw one of those away because they're exactly the same if you haven't already noticed that. But a lot of duplication sometimes, so I just wanted you to be aware of that. Ecclesiastes 7 verse 10. Remember, Solomon is experimenting with life. What is man's purpose? But in the course of that, he has learned a lot of wisdom, hasn't he? And he's been granted a lot of wisdom by the Almighty God. In fact, he is known as the wisest man on the earth during his time. He is the wisest of all the men of the East and other places. And so occasionally he just stops and he starts giving us a lot of proverbs. A lot of little pithy statements of wisdom that are good for us to consider. And listen to what he says in this verse. It's one that we may somewhat disagree with Solomon on. Okay? Say not thou, what is the cause that the former days were better than these? For thou dost not inquire wisely concerning this. Man has a tendency to look on the past and think that the past is always better than what? Than the present. Don't we? Let me read you something. It's in your notes there. It's found in Exodus 16, 2 and 3. The children of Israel had been in Egyptian bondage, had they not? Let me ask you something. Was that bad? Okay, it was terrible. Okay, they were afflicted greatly by the Egyptians, weren't they? And they were afflicted for a long period of time by the Egyptians. And now they've been rescued from that. They've crossed the Red Sea. They're heading toward the Promised Land. Freedom is theirs. And listen to them. And the whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the children of Israel said unto them, Would to God that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt. Man. When we sat by flesh pots, and when we did eat bread to the full, for ye have brought us forth into this wilderness to kill the whole assembly with hunger. What are they saying? The former days were better than the present. It was better for us to have died in Egypt. We had flesh pots to the full. We had all kinds of water to drink. All of our needs were supplied. And you just brought us out here in the wilderness to die. The former days are better than the present. Wow. We often focus on the good old days, don't we? And oftentimes we long for what? For the good old days. Oh, for the good old days. Has anybody ever said that? Yeah. And how many of you have ever thought this? Well, back in the good old days, good old. What do we mean when we say good old? Well, I just wrote some things down. There was a great focus on the family back in the good old days, wasn't there? In fact, families oftentimes lived together, didn't they? Maybe even on the same property. And the children were there, the grandchildren were there, the great-grandchildren were there. The good old days, families were together. And now guess what? Families are hundreds of miles apart, aren't they? And families hardly ever get together. The good old days were back then. Less crime. Okay? That's what we are taught, aren't we? That there's a whole lot less crime back then. Simpler lifestyles, right? No cell phones. No games. No kids with their heads in their tablets. Okay, they didn't even know what a tablet was. They thought it was something you take. Okay. Religion was important. Neighbors cared for each other. Does anybody have someone that lives within a door or two of you and you don't even know them? Yep. There's a bunch of us may have people like that, you know it? I know about 6 or 8 pretty close right around us, but you get much beyond that, and I don't hardly know them. We may wave at each other or something, you know, but that's about it. Okay? Back in the good old days, everybody knew everybody and everybody knew everybody's business. Oh, I didn't mean to get out of the good old days. Sorry about that. Okay? How about this next one? There was respect for the elderly, wasn't there? And then lastly, I put down here a respect for authority. Those were the good old days. And when we say that, those are the kind of things that we're meaning, right? That back then, these kind of things existed, and those kind of things don't exist today. But I want you to listen to what Solomon says. For thou dost not inquire wisely concerning this. Man. Now, you might take Solomon to task about that statement, mightn't you? And you'd be arguing with the wisest man on the earth. How stupid would you be? You know it? He must mean something by that, doesn't he? So I wrote down some other things. Folks, the basics of life were oftentimes difficult to obtain, weren't they? I realize everybody lived off the land and you could can and you could preserve meats and things of that nature, but you have 2 or 3 or 4 hard years where there's no crops. It got tough, didn't it? And you began to run out of food supply and run out of stuff, and it wasn't nearly as easy as running down to Publix or Walmart or Aldi's or wherever you go. How about this next one? Life expectancy was shorter. My granddad died at 54. Life expectancy in the 30s, 40s, and 50s was around 60 to 70, rather than being 70 to 80 and now even being pushed into the early 80s. Why? There's a lot of reasons, aren't there? There was a multitude of large-scale wars back then, wasn't there? World War I, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. And then we get into the more modern wars, do we not? Over in the Middle East. War after war after war after war. Fortunately, right now, as far as a nation, we're not in the middle of a war. Oh yes, we're sending some supplies to Ukraine versus Russia, but we've not been in the middle of a war in quite some time. Many groups and societies struggled for their rights in the good old days, didn't they? Does anybody not remember the 60s? Oh, the good old days. Turn on television. Oh, man, there were all kinds of riots and fights and all kinds of stuff going on. It wasn't a pretty scene. I remember some of that stuff. We didn't have some of the medical advances that we do today, did we? That's one of the reasons individuals die. We didn't have some of the medicines that we have today. We didn't have the technological advances of our day, did we? You actually had to get up off the couch to turn on the television. Whew, mercy. Wear you out. Especially if the channel didn't have a good show on it. That's when you taught your kid to turn it. He became your channel changer. We did not have the conveniences of our day, did we? I don't know about you, I kind of like driving my truck around. It's much better than a mule and wagon. I was glad I got to kind of walk to school a block around the corner rather than having to get up and saddle a mule and go to school every day. That wouldn't be too fun. Notice this next one, and folks, this is what interests me. When you go back into some of the good old days, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, there were many homes where there was a lot of abuse that went on in those homes. Did you know that? We're talking about verbal abuse, physical abuse, and even sexual abuse in those homes. Some of the children who were lived back then, they're now revealing it because it's more popular now to talk about it, more acceptable to talk about it. They didn't talk about those things, okay? But it impacted their lives, but nobody talked about it back then. That was just what? That was just accepted. Or you just keep all that undercover and don't talk about that stuff. The good old days. There was less ability to travel, wasn't there? And then lastly, I put down there were fewer opportunities to advance in life. You did what the previous generation did, didn't you? Okay, and you didn't have the advancement that many of individuals have. I guess it was my mom and dad's generation. They left the farm and went into the city. And since then, me and my family have pretty much been in the city, or at least lived like city dwellers since then. Okay, what if my mom and dad had just stayed on the farm and I got raised on a farm? I may still be on the farm today. And that's tough living, isn't it? It's hard living, hard work. For thou dost not inquire wisely concerning this. You know what needs to happen? Each generation needs to look at its generation and understand that every generation has good things and every generation has bad things, don't we? We have a tendency in the generation in which we live to always look at what? The negative and the bad. And then when we look back, we forget the bad and see only the good. That ain't right. That's not fair, is it? Since we're living in the present, we need to labor to make it the best it can be. The past is what? It's past. You're not going to bring that back. I don't care how hard you want to bring it back. We're not going to do that, are we? So let's appreciate what we have right now. And guess what? I don't know about you, life isn't that bad. You know it? In 10 minutes from my house, I can have just about anything I need. Did you know that? Food, water, exercise, gas, medical attention. I can take my car to have it repaired. What else? Yeah, 5-minute oil change. There's a girl. Entertainment, movies, the beach. We've got it made, guys. And what do? Oh, these are terrible times. We need the good old days. Well, you just go on back there, and I'm just going to enjoy what I got right now. You know that? Because it's not as bad as we sometimes think. Questions, comments, anybody? Some of you grew up in the good old days, didn't you? Would you go back? Jeannie? Oh yes, that medical attention and stuff. I'm telling you, I don't know very many people, even adults, who would give up their cell phones. Now you may hate them when you see kids have them, but you leave yours at home, you turn around and go back and get it. Don't you? 20 miles down, forgot my phone, oh, my day's spoiled. Okay, unbelievable. We're as bad as kids. So Solomon, it's amazing to me how right Solomon is, even though initially we would argue with him, wouldn't we? Okay. What about this next one? This is weird. Ecclesiastes 7:11. I say that because Solomon has already, in this book, discussed inheritances, hasn't he? And what has he said about inheritances? He goes, an inheritance. Inheritance goes to somebody who doesn't understand what it took to get it, right? Here's a parent who has labored and worked and amassed $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 in an inheritance, right? And they've worked hard for that, and it's taken them 50, 60 years to get that. They die, and they give it to a child or a grandchild, and guess what? They don't know what it took to get that. All they know is what? Ooh, look at this money I got. And they go out, and within 6 months or a year, every dime of it is gone, isn't it? No appreciation for it. Sometimes individuals get that money, and those individuals aren't good people, are they? They won't use that money for good purposes. They'll use that money for evil purposes. Sometimes we die and that money just goes to the government, doesn't it? That's sad. What's the government going to do with it? You know? We know what they're going to do with it, don't we? And so Solomon looks at an inheritance and he says, man, there's a lot of bad things about an inheritance. And then all of a sudden, he gets to chapter 7 and he flips the coin. And listen to what he says. Wisdom is good with an inheritance. Ah, has he just now qualified an inheritance? Oh, yes. Now notice this. And by it there is profit to them that see the sun. Wow. Solomon is looking at the positive side of an inheritance. Wisdom is good with an inheritance. Wisdom is the ability to put knowledge and experience into action for good. It's not enough just to have experience. It's not enough just to have knowledge. I need to know how to take those two things and use them, don't I? And that's wisdom, folks. And notice what wisdom understands when it comes to inheritance. I just wrote down a few things. There is such a thing as wasteful spending, isn't there? You get $1 million and you go out and buy a $700,000 home. What's that about? Right? Now I got this massive home, massive taxes, and I've only got $300,000 left. So I go buy me a humongous truck that cost me $110,000. And what have I done? I'm just wasting my money, right? There is such a... And see, when you get an inheritance, you need to understand wasteful spending. There's some things you just don't want, don't need. Every now and then, Kathleen, we'll be driving down the road, and I'll say something about something. She says, and all she says is this: "Want or need? Want or need?" I said, "Would you just hush? Just hush. It's a want that I need." If I ever mention a scooter or want or need, oh man. How about this next one, the definition of wealth? You know, most people don't understand what really constitutes wealth. If you're poor and you only make, say, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a year, and you get $100,000, does that seem like a lot of money? Yeah. It seems like a boatload of money. Wow, man, that's 10 times my salary or 5 times my salary. Woo, look how much money I got. So you quit your job. And guess what? You find out real quick, you ain't wealthy. You know it? You thought you were, but you're not wealthy. I've gone through that in 6 months, and now I'm what? I'm poor without a job. See, we need to understand what constitutes true wealth. And true wealth in today's society requires a lot of money. Do you know that? I mean, true wealth. When you tell people you need $1 million to $2 million to retire on, that just goes over their heads. It really goes over young people's heads to think I need to amass $1 million or $2 million. Okay, but look at what you're getting on interest rates now. Pennies, is it not? Just pennies. And how quickly you can just breeze through $100,000. It doesn't take very much. It's amazing to me how much funerals cost, isn't it? You know, $20,000, $25,000. You hear of individuals spending $40,000, $50,000 on one wedding. Parents, one wedding. Go out and buy you a nice car, $40,000, $50,000 easy, isn't it? It's unbelievable how much things are. And some people just don't have an understanding of wealth. What about this next one? The need to see the future. You know, we can't actually see the future, can I? But I can see the future by looking at other people, right? Here I am at 60. I can look at a 70 or 80-year-old and I ought to be able to see what? The future. Now, I may not replicate their life perfectly, but guess what? There's some things about their life that I will experience. And I need to be able to see that, and I need to be able to make plans for that. Because if I don't, I could come up pretty foolish, couldn't I? Especially when it comes to an inheritance. How about this next one? Delayed gratification. Delayed gratification. You know, when you can just go out and get what you need right now, is there a problem with that? Oh, yes. There's a lot of problems with that, isn't there? Number one, I might buy something that I really don't need. Anybody ever done that? Buy something and it's still in your closet and you've never opened it. I've got about 4 things that I could show you that are just like that. Never opened it. It's there. Why did I buy that? Okay. I should have just what? I should have just waited. Or you buy it, you have it, you're using it somewhat, but guess what? You need something worser. And that's a word. Okay? You need something worse than you need that. But guess what? You don't have the money anymore because you bought this other crazy thing. Or this one, and that's Kathleen's statement. She added that to my notes. Needs versus wants. You know, is that hard to distinguish sometime? A need versus a want? That's hard to distinguish, isn't it? But I say that, and really it's not, because the very minute you ask yourself the question, you can usually answer it, can't you? Well, I don't need it, okay? But what? Yeah, but I'm going to get it. And we've talked about in Solomon even says, that's okay, right? As long as I have some understanding about that. And that's what he means here. Wisdom is good with a what? With an inheritance. If I understand these kind of things and these concepts, and I get this $1 million, $2 million, $5 million inheritance, then that's okay. But if I don't have those understanding and I don't have that wisdom, it could be my end and my downfall, couldn't it? Unbelievable. There's a profit to them that see the sun. Isn't that don't you love the way Solomon talks about people? Notice what he says. And by it there is profit to them that see the sun. Dead people don't see the sun anymore. They're where? They're dead. They're under the ground. They don't see the sun. Who are the ones who are seeing the sun? The living. We are. We see the sun. So he's talking about the living in that statement. There is a profit to them that see the sun. Those who continue to live after the death of a loved one. An inheritance can bless a person's life if it is used wisely, can it? Proper purchases, good investments, donations to charity, getting out of debt, pursuing an education. All of those kind of things might be a good use of an inheritance. And so Solomon talks about this idea of inheritance. So there's a bad side of inheritance, and there is a wonderful side of an inheritance. And sometimes we just have a tendency to look at one side, don't we? And when a person looks at one side and then he looks at the other side, we think he's what? We think he's contradicting himself, don't we? And yet, you don't have to be contradictory because there are two sides to coins many, many times. Any questions or comments about inheritances? I just made up the $1 million or $2 million. I don't think very many of us get that much, you know. Leave you about $50 and you go, oh, man. Okay. Ecclesiastes 7:12. For wisdom is defense, and money is defense. But the excellency of knowledge is that wisdom giveth life to them that have it. Do you ever just read those words and just kind of wonder, what is he saying? You know, sometimes we do that, don't we? Okay? And when you finally stop and you really look at it and you study it, it's not that difficult. Solomon notes two things that are a defense. And that little word defense means this: a shade, a protection, a hedge around an individual. And the two things that can protect us are what? Wisdom and money. Isn't that interesting? He doesn't deny that money has a good side to it. Money has a useful side to it, doesn't it? Okay? The Bible never condemns money. The Bible condemns the love of money. The Bible condemns an arrogant, proud attitude that an individual develops when he has money. But just the having of money and the having of riches, there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it can be a what? Solomon says it can be a defense, can it? Notice some things I put down there, 10 of them. All would agree that money has its benefits, doesn't it? Money gives you options and choices in life, doesn't it? You don't have money as a businessman to purchase you medical insurance. Okay? So you don't have any medical insurance. You get sick, guess what you don't have? You don't have many options. Right? You just run down to the emergency room and hope the good doctor's on tonight. Right? But if you have good insurance because you've been able to purchase that, and you've been able to look at all the options and cost really doesn't matter to you, man, that's pretty nice, isn't it? See, money provides you with options in life, and that's good. Secondly, money promotes savings, specialization, productivity, and efficiency, doesn't it? Thirdly, money facilitates planning of both production and consumption. This is what I know I can do. This is what I know I can possess because I have what? I have money. Man. Money gives you security and peace of mind, doesn't it? There's a lot of people who wake up every morning worried about how they're going to feed their family today. You know that? And that's not a good feeling. And it's all because they don't have much what? Much money. Am I going to go and buy a roast? Or am I going to go buy Spam and pay the light bill? That's a horrible feeling. Okay? And it's nice to know I can do both. I can buy my pork roast and I can have my lights on too. Money can be used to revive the economy from depression. Money can create more life experiences and help you to give to others. Money allows one to bounce back from setbacks in life, doesn't it? Lose $1 million, but you got $5 million, it's okay. I'll bounce back. It's a big whop, isn't it? Unreal. Money enables one to have stronger personal relationships. Money allows one to live a healthier life in general. Food, exercise, doctor visits, meds, safety, etc. Money gives a person a comfortable retirement. What's wrong with any of that stuff? In fact, that's the society in which you and I have grown up, isn't it? Those are the kind of things that we're taught to have. Solomon was right. Money is a what? It's a defense. Don't condemn money. Okay? But notice what he also says. Wisdom is also a what? A defense. There's a lot of people with money who ain't got no wisdom. And there's a lot of people who got wisdom who haven't got any money. It's better to have what? Both. If you can accumulate it. My father-in-law, he used to always make this statement to me. Knowledge is power. He said that all the time. Knowledge is power. And isn't that the truth? You get on a job and you learn as much of that job as you possibly can learn. Even the stuff that they don't tell you to learn, you still learn it, right? Guess what you become? You become an invaluable, no, you become a valuable employee to that company, don't you? And they don't want to lose you. They know how much knowledge you have. They know how much experience that you have. And in fact, they will push you up the ladder in order to make certain that you stay there with that knowledge. Don't they? Knowledge is power. But now notice this. If we were to ask today, which of these two would individuals rather have, wisdom or money, what do you think the masses would say? Money. That's what the masses would say, because they see all those tangible benefits of money, don't they? But listen to what Solomon says. Solomon says, "But the excellency of knowledge is that wisdom giveth life to them that have it." Man, that's a potent statement. The excellency of knowledge. See, it was interesting. My father, he was a manic depressive, and for years we had no clue what his diagnosis was, what the problem was. He'd just go into these crazy fits and stuff, and he'd be up all night, and then he'd come home from work and be in bed the rest of the day. Finally got diagnosed. I'm manic depressive, and he was given lithium as his drug, and it helped him. It balanced him. He still had a few highs and lows, but he was a lot more balanced. And my dad said this: "If you put $1 million right there and my lithium right there, I'll take my lithium every time." $1 million, folks. Because he knew that the lithium kept him like this, kept him sane. Now that's what Solomon's doing right now. He's putting two things out there. He says, here's wisdom and here's money. Which do you want? Which is better for you? And he says, if you have excellent knowledge, if you have excellent understanding, you'll choose what every time? You'll choose wisdom every time. And the question's why? And he tells us, because wisdom giveth life to them that have it. Now the question that we ask now is this: what is he talking about? Wisdom giving life. Well, when the Bible talks about wisdom most of the time, you want to know what kind of wisdom it's talking about?
Wisdom of God.
That's right. Divine wisdom. The wisdom of God. Folks, you can't get any better wisdom than the wisdom of God. And it's the only wisdom that will give what? Life. Not life here. Eternal life. And that's what Solomon has reference to right here. Wisdom giveth life. The most important blessing that a man could ever obtain is eternal life. And guess what? Money can't give it to you. You can have all the money in the world, die, and lose your soul. You can be a pauper and have the wisdom of God and have eternal life in the hereafter. A huge difference, isn't it? So if you ever presented the choice, money, wisdom, man, we better jump on that wisdom every time because it's a lot more beneficial to us. Unbelievable. Notice that next page. It's L-O-N-G, long. Okay? So we will stop right there and we will talk about the long page next week. Okay? Notice what he says. Consider the work of God. Ooh-wee. That's a lot to consider. It may be 10 pages I give you next week.